to know Greg Gumbel a little bit too, and I got to know
Right.
two or three others the same way. Greg
Right.
Gumbel was the same way as Tim Brando. Could not have
Yeah.
been more engaging. Could not have been more helpful. Could not. I mean, could have easily taken the big time attitude of, Who are you? You're a local radio guy that I did the radio call sheet with."
Yeah.
All right, so say something. Greg is no longer with us. It's sad. It's part of life. Life, unfortunately for all of us, at some point, this happens. It has happened here.
Yeah.
There's a hole. I'm saying this. There's a hole right now because he's not there in that chair and was not there Selection Sunday. What was your reaction watching the tribute they did? They played the Rolling Stones Start Me Up because Greg was such a fan of the Rolling Stones. They
Yeah.
showed him later. The whole crew was in Rolling Stone shirts besides the guys that were on
Yeah.
the TV set. What did you
Yeah.
think of all that tribute? What do you want to say about Greg Gumbel as I segue to that, about him not being there as the host of CBS's coverage for so many years?
Well, your thoughts about me that I really genuinely appreciate. And, that you didn't touch on this, but it was a few years later it's a small world. It's a small business. You find this out when you get in, but just a few years later, um, the guys that were working in Tampa that were producing the preseason
Yes.
games for the Buccaneers happened to take over the Saints broadcasts. And I got a call from CBS. They actually called my bosses at CBS to see if they would help get in touch with me to see if I would do Saints preseason games with Archie Manning and Ron Jaworski, who was
Uh-huh.
also working in Tampa with you guys. And and then you were our sideline guy that first year. I want to say
And the
maybe that was
host.
2000. Was that 2003 or four? Somewhere in there.
2004, I was
Or
the
okay.
host, and I did it for 1 year as a
Yeah.
freelancer
Yeah.
with you. And again, you guys could not have been more fantastic to deal with. So bravo. It
Yeah.
is a
Yeah.
small world that a few years
It is a
later, that's
small
what we were
world.
doing. That there's no
Yeah.
doubt.
But I felt similarly about Greg as you were complimenting me. It almost sounded like me talking to Greg years later or years ago. But uh, when I went to ESPN full time and moved from Baton Rouge in 1985, in 1986, I'd been freelancing with ESPN, got my first ACC tournament in '85, went all the way to the semifinals, working with Larry Conley and Dick Vitale. And then I did CFA football the following year. All that was freelance. I was still working in Baton Rouge at the CBS affiliate. So I moved in November of '86 to Bristol, and all those guys for 4 or 5 years, and was a respected pro and was doing something that I wanted to do. And I knew I could do both studio as well as play by play. So I was really flattered. And when I signed to go up to ESPN, I thought, man, I'm going to get to work with Greg Gumbel. Well, I get there and I find out one of the reasons why there was a Sports Center staff opening was because Greg was leaving to go to MSG in New York. And they had hired John Saunders the same week. So John and I were coming in at the same time. And it turned out it would be John Saunders and I that would be paired together, not Greg and me. And John and I, of course, became fast friends. But, I followed Greg all through that, never really got a chance to talk to him much. But when I joined CBS in '96, he was over at NBC. And when they got the NFL back in '98, like a lot of guys that were at NBC, he came back to CBS. Vern Lundquist, who had gone to Turner, came back to CBS. And he was going to do both some studio work as well as play by play. And before I got there, he had been doing play by play of the tournament for CBS
Right.
before he had left to go to NBC. So we just had a lot in common that way, from a business standpoint. But what he did at ESPN was pretty remarkable. And I'm writing a book now. I think I've told you about it. And
Yes.
it's going to be in the book because when I got there and found out I wasn't going to work with him, I said, really? He left? He said, yeah. He really didn't want to leave. But the guy that had just taken over Sports Center, a gentleman by the name of Kurt Varner, said, I'm new to this job. And the reason I'm new to this job is because the two guys that were running Sports Center made a lot of enemies. And when Greg Gumbel left, he wrote the bosses a long goodbye letter. And in that, he suggested there be some changes made because the people need to be treated a little bit better. Those bosses were the ones that were telling Berman not to use nicknames anymore and all that
Uh-huh.
stuff.
Uh-huh.
That's been written in other ESPN books. Anyway, Greg wasn't trying to be mean spirited to anyone. He was just trying to make life for the people he was leaving behind better. That's what he was trying to do. And that's the kind of guy he always was. He was
Yep.
always thinking about other people, the people he was leaving behind. And once we got into Studio 43 together, he would be working on Sundays and I would be working on Saturdays. So we shared the same chair, just on different days. At first, it was Jim Nance doing the NFL Today, and then Greg, of course, and Jim split up. Changed jobs. They just reversed positions. Jim went to the booth, and Greg came back into the studio. So I saw him for a period of about 5 or 6 years every week, and we would always talk. Um, our politics were diametrically different, but that's not uncommon in our business. And I had the same sort of relationship with Saunders. We would talk about everything under the sun. His engaging personality, though, and the way he treated others made you feel like when you were there, no matter what position you had, you could be a cable puller, a camera guy, a research person, or a fellow broadcaster. And he treated you with the same kind of dignity. And that's something I tell people this all the time. In our business, everybody's going to look at talent in a certain way. And I think if you just take the time to find out who those people are that are helping you look good every week, to find out, remember who their names are, know who the camera guy is. Freddie is my camera guy here. That's Joey over here. Klaus is over there. Take the time to do that, to make them feel special. He had all those qualities. Those are things that I think make for a long-lasting and enduring career over time, because guys or women that treat others poorly, okay, it's a competitive business. And when things certainly start going maybe not your way, if you've treated people poorly along the way, there will be no golden parachute.
Goodbye.
Yeah,
Yes.
you will not. At some point, your day will come, and you'll be the last to know that it's over.
Okay? Good way to put that. Yes.
Greg understood that part of the business. And he, a little bit like Saunders, he got into television late, was extraordinarily talented, could do a lot of different things, but really he didn't think he could do it. And he talked to me a lot about that. Bryant, his brother, had all the bravado and had tremendous confidence. And some would argue at times could be curt to others on occasion. But it was Bryant that, basically shook his head and said, "Man, what are you doing? You can do this. He told him to take that job in Chicago. He basically begged him to take the job in Chicago, and he took off after that. Greg really never, I think, knew how great a talent he was. And he truly was a five-tool talent. One of those guys that could do anything. Studio, play-by-play, whatever. Not everybody can do that, as you well know.
Amen.
And but it was the way he treated others that set him apart. And by the way, when I say what I did about Bryant, I still consider Bryant Gumbel a dear friend. I do. We were always fine. But the image that Bryant had in the industry was
sure
very, very different.
But
from
what's
Greg.
fascinating, because you know that I know this and I keep track of all this. Bryant was hosting the NCAA tournament coverage on NBC in the late 70s.
Right.
And
when Enberg, McGuire, and Packer were together.
And he was the host of arguably the most famous Final Four and championship game that's maybe ever going to have been played, has been played, or will be played, and that's Magic
30 million
Johnson.
people watching. 30 million people watching.
Magic Johnson, Michigan State, Larry Bird, Indiana State, and he's the host. And how wild is it that some probably 15 years later, his brother slides in 15, 18 years later, and becomes synonymous with Selection Sunday and the host of the NCAA tournament.